Sometimes fate writes stories in invisible ink, only revealing the words when hearts are ready to read them. In the sterile corridors of Chicago General Hospital, a broke construction worker would face an impossible choice that would unravel. A mystery 15 years in the making. What he didn't know was that the woman whose children he was about to save had once pulled him from the wreckage of his own shattered world, setting in motion a chain of events that would prove miracles. Don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they whisper. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in the children's wing of Chicago General Hospital hummed with their familiar electric drone, casting everything in that peculiar shade of institutional white that made even healthy people look pale. Marcus Rivera stood at the reception desk, shifting his weight from one worn work boot to the other, the smell of sawdust and paint still clinging to his flannel shirt, despite 3 washes this week. His calloused fingers drummed against the laminated counter as he waited for the nurse to finish her phone call. Behind him, the automatic doors swooshed open and closed with mechanical precision, admitting a steady stream of worried parents, visiting relatives, and medical staff, whose scrubs rustled with each hurried step. The sounds blended into a symphony of controlled chaos that Marcus had grown to know too well over the past 6 months. "Mr. Rivera?" The nurse finally looked up, her tired eyes kind but efficient. "Room 314 is ready for you." Marcus nodded his thanks and made his way down the corridor, his boots squeaking against the polished linoleum. The walls were painted in cheerful pastels, decorated with cartoon animals and inspirational posters that tried desperately to inject warmth into a place where childhood innocence came to battle disease. He had memorized every elephant, every rainbow, every smiling sun during his countless trips down this same hallway. Room 314 held his universe. His 8-year-old daughter Sophia lay propped against a mountain of pillows, her once thick black hair now reduced to wispy strands that barely covered her scalp. The chemo had stolen her hair, her appetite, and most days her energy, but it hadn't touched her smile. That brilliant, gap-toothed grin still had the power to light up the darkest corners of Marcus's world. "Daddy!" Sophia's voice was weaker than it used to be, but her excitement was genuine as she spotted him in the doorway. "Guess what? Nurse Patricia brought me new coloring books. They have horses in them." Marcus crossed the small room in 3 quick strides, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to the top of his daughter's head. The familiar weight of fear and love pressed against his chest, a constant companion these days. "Horses, huh? I bet they're beautiful, just like you, Mia." Sophia giggled, the sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. She held up her latest creation, a purple horse with wings galloping across a field of orange flowers. "This one's named Thunder. He can fly anywhere he wants to go." "Thunder's got good taste," Marcus said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed. "I'd fly somewhere warm too if I had wings." The morning routine unfolded with practiced ease. Marcus helped Sophia with her breakfast, though she could only manage a few bites of the bland hospital oatmeal. They worked on her homework together, simple math problems that she solved with determined concentration despite the medication making. Her thoughts fuzzy. When her eyelids grew heavy, Marcus read to her from their current book, a story about a brave princess who saved her kingdom with nothing but her wits and a faithful horse named Starlight. These moments felt stolen from time itself. Marcus knew how precious they were, how quickly they could slip away. 6 months ago, Sophia had been a whirlwind of energy, racing through their small apartment, chattering about her friends at school, begging for just 5 more minutes at the playground. Then came the headaches that wouldn't go away, the mysterious bruises, the frightening trip to the emergency room that changed everything. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words still hit Marcus like a physical blow every time he heard them. The doctors had explained the treatment plan with careful optimism, outlining months of chemotherapy, radiation, and hope measured in percentages and statistical probabilities. What they hadn't prepared him for was the crushing weight of medical bills that arrived with ruthless regularity, each one representing another piece of his financial stability crumbling away. Marcus had been forced to take whatever construction work he could find, odd jobs that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions about his irregular schedule. The insurance covered most of Sophia's treatment, but the co-pays, the medications, the time off work, the parking fees that added up like drops of water eventually flooding a basement, it all accumulated into a mountain of debt that kept Marcus awake at night, staring at the ceiling and calculating impossible mathematics. Around 11 that morning, Sophia's oncologist, Dr. Williams, stopped by for his daily rounds. He was a tall, scholarly man with prematurely gray hair and the kind of gentle manner that made even the most difficult conversations bearable. Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs in the doctor's expression, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was concerned, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth when he had encouraging news. Today, Dr. Williams wore his poker face, the neutral expression that revealed nothing while he examined Sophia, checking her charts, asking questions about how she was feeling. Sophia answered with the stoic bravery that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to possess, describing her pain levels with the clinical precision of someone who had been asked these questions too many times. "Can I speak with you for a moment, Mr. Rivera?" Dr. Williams asked when he finished his examination. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Sophia absorbed in her coloring book. The corridor buzzed with its usual activity, but Marcus felt like they were standing in a bubble of suspended time. Dr. Williams clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture Marcus had come to recognize as the prelude to complicated news. Sophia's responding well to the current treatment protocol, the doctor began, and Marcus felt his shoulders relax slightly. Her white cell count is improving, and the latest scans show the tumors are shrinking. "That's good news, right?" Marcus asked, though something in the doctor's tone suggested there was more to come. "It is good news," Dr. Williams confirmed. "However, we're approaching a critical juncture in her treatment. The next phase will require a more aggressive approach, and there's a newer treatment available that could significantly improve her chances of long-term remission." Marcus felt his stomach drop. In his experience, newer treatments meant more expensive treatments. What kind of more aggressive approach? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Williams launched into an explanation of CAR T-cell therapy, a cutting-edge treatment that involved extracting Sophia's own immune cells, genetically modifying them to fight the cancer, and then reintroducing them to her system. It was revolutionary medicine, the kind of breakthrough that saved lives and made headlines. It was also, as Marcus had suspected, extraordinarily expensive. The treatment itself would be covered by insurance, Dr. Williams explained, but there are additional costs. The procedure requires a longer hospital stay, sometimes up to 6 weeks. There are medications that aren't fully covered, monitoring, equipment, and... He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I'm required to inform you that some families find it beneficial to have private duty nursing during the recovery period." Marcus nodded, trying to process the information while mental calculations ran like a broken calculator in his head. 6 weeks in the hospital meant 6 weeks without work. Private duty nursing meant expenses his insurance definitely wouldn't cover. The treatment might save Sophia's life, but it could also destroy any chance they had of financial recovery. "How long do I have to decide?" Marcus asked. "We'd like to start the process within the next 2 weeks," Dr. Williams replied. "I know it's a lot to consider. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions." After the doctor left, Marcus returned to Sophia's room and tried to maintain the cheerful facade that had become second nature. They played Go Fish with a deck of cards featuring cartoon characters, and Sophia won 3 games in a row, celebrating each victory with quiet enthusiasm that broke and mended Marcus's heart simultaneously. Lunch arrived on a beige plastic tray, and Marcus helped Sophia eat what she could manage while they watched cartoons on the small television mounted on the wall. The shows were too young for her, really, but the bright colors and silly voices seemed to ease the clinical atmosphere of the room. Marcus found himself grateful for these small mercies, the way a rainbow sticker on a medicine cup could make swallowing pills easier, or how a nurse's gentle joke could coax a smile from his daughter's tired face. The afternoon brought physical therapy, a session with the hospital's child life specialist, and a parade of medical staff checking vitals, adjusting 4 drips, and maintaining the complex machinery that had become the backdrop of Sophia's existence. Marcus watched it all with the hypervigilance of a parent whose child's life depended on machines and medicines he couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus stepped out to call his sister Elena, the only family he had left since their parents died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Elena lived in Phoenix with her husband and 2 kids, working as a teacher and stretching her own budget to cover after-school activities and summer camps. She had been sending what money she could, $50 here, $100 there, but Marcus knew she was already sacrificing her own family's needs. "How's our girl today?" Elena asked, her voice warm with concern despite the miles between them. "She's good," Marcus said, standing near a window that overlooked the hospital's courtyard. Below, he could see a small garden where patients and families sometimes sat when the weather was nice. Today, it was empty, the Chicago autumn wind sending leaves skittering across the concrete paths. "Dr. Williams wants to try a new treatment." He explained the situation as simply as he could, not wanting to burden Elena with the full weight of his financial fears. She listened without interrupting, offering soft sounds of encouragement and understanding. When he finished, there was a long pause that stretched across the phone line like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. "What do you need?" Elena finally asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I just wanted you to know what we're dealing with." They talked for a few more minutes about practical things, about Elena's kids and their school activities, about the weather and the upcoming holidays that felt surreal to contemplate when your world had shrunk to the size of a hospital room. When Marcus hung up, he felt both better and worse, comforted by his sister's love, but aware that love couldn't pay medical bills. He returned to Sophia's room to find her napping, her small body curled under the thin hospital blanket. Marcus settled back into his chair and pulled out his phone, scrolling through job postings and trying to calculate how many extra shifts he would need to work to afford the treatment Dr. Williams had described. The math was depressing, a series of numbers that refused to add up to anything resembling hope. The day nurse, a woman named Janet with gray hair and laugh lines, earned over decades of caring for sick children, stopped by to check Sophia's 4. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that sick children needed rest more than conversation, but she caught Marcus's eye and offered a small, encouraging smile. "She's a fighter, that one," Janet whispered, adjusting Sophia's blanket with maternal tenderness. "I've been doing this for 25 years, and I can always tell which kids have that special spark. Your daughter's got it in spades." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. He had heard similar comments from other nurses, other doctors, other parents in the waiting rooms and cafeterias, who recognized the particular brand of exhausted determination that came with fighting for your child's life. It was meant to be encouraging, and Marcus was grateful for the kindness, but it also felt like tremendous pressure. Sophia was fighting, but was he fighting hard enough? Was he doing everything he could to give her the best possible chance? Evening brought the familiar ritual of dinner, medications, and bedtime stories. Sophia had perked up as the day wore on, her energy following the unpredictable rhythms dictated by her treatment schedule. They watched a movie together on Marcus's tablet, sharing a single pair of earbuds and whispering commentary about the silly plot and obvious special effects. For an hour, they were just a father and daughter enjoying time together, the medical equipment fading into background noise. As visiting hours wound down, Marcus prepared for the nightly negotiation about whether he should stay or go home. The hospital had a policy about overnight stays for parents, technically requiring approval, except in certain circumstances. Marcus had learned to navigate this system, understanding which nurses might bend the rules, and which shift supervisors were more sympathetic to a single father situation. Tonight, Janet was working the overnight shift, which meant Marcus could probably stay without any complications. He had slept in that uncomfortable chair more nights than he cared to count, his back aching and his neck stiff, but unable to bear the thought of leaving Sophia alone in the dark with only machines for company. "Daddy, you don't have to stay," Sophia said as he adjusted the chair's position for the least uncomfortable sleeping angle. "I'm not scared anymore." Her words were meant to be brave, to release him from the obligation of keeping vigil, but Marcus heard the underlying vulnerability in her voice. She was 8 years old, surrounded by beeping machines and 4 tubes, facing a disease that most adults couldn't comprehend. Of course she was scared, even if she was too brave to admit it. "I want to stay," which was true. "Besides, who's going to protect you from the snoring patient in room 316? Sophia giggled, remembering the elderly man down the hall whose sleep apnea created a symphony of sounds that echoed through the corridor. It had become a running joke between them, their way of finding humor in an environment that offered precious little to laugh about. Marcus settled into his makeshift bed, pulling a thin blanket over his shoulders and trying to find a position that wouldn't leave him completely crippled in the morning. Through the window, he could see the lights of the city stretching into the distance, millions of people going about their evening routines, unaware that in room 314 of Chicago General Hospital, a father was calculating the cost of his daughters' life and wondering if love would be enough to bridge the gap between need and possibility. The hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, the sounds growing quieter but never disappearing entirely. Nurses patted down the corridors in soft-soled shoes, their flashlights creating small pools of light as they checked on sleeping patients. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried briefly before being soothed back to sleep. An elevator chimed softly as it delivered late-night visitors or transported patients to emergency procedures. Marcus lay in the darkness, listening to the steady rhythm of Sophia's breathing and the gentle hum of her four-pump. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new challenges, new calculations about money and hope and the impossible choices that parents shouldn't have to make. But tonight, his daughter was sleeping peacefully, her small hand curled around the stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion since the diagnosis. In the morning, he would figure out how to afford the treatment that could save her. Life, he would make the phone calls, fill out the paperwork, and somehow find a way to turn hope into reality. Because that's what fathers did. They found ways to move mountains, even when they didn't have the proper equipment. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to sleep, carrying with him the sound of Sophia's steady breathing and the weight of tomorrow's possibilities. In the distance, the city hummed with its own dreams and struggles, unaware that in one small room, love was preparing to battle the impossible and refuse to lose. The emergency alarm pierced through the hospital's afternoon quiet like a blade, cutting silk. Marcus jolted awake from his restless doze in the chair beside Sophia's bed, his construction worker instincts immediately alert to the sound of crisis. Down the corridor, red lights flashed in urgent rhythm while an automated voice announced a code blue in the pediatric emergency department. Sophia stirred in her bed, her eyes fluttering open with the confused disorientation of someone pulled from medicated sleep. "What's happening, Daddy?" Just hospital stuff, Mia, Marcus said, reaching over to smooth her hair. Nothing for you to worry about. But through the partially open door, Marcus could see the controlled chaos erupting in the hallway. Medical staff rushed past carrying equipment he couldn't identify, their faces set with the grim determination of people racing against time. The emergency wasn't in their wing, but the entire hospital seemed to vibrate with an electric tension that made the air itself feel charged. Marcus had been around enough construction accidents to recognize the particular energy that surrounded life or death situations. There was a sharpness to every movement, a precision born from training and necessity. Whatever was happening in the emergency department required every available resource, and the hospital was responding with the choreographed efficiency of a machine designed to save lives. Dr. Williams appeared in their doorway, his usually calm demeanor replaced by something more urgent. "Mr. Rivera, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss Sophia's treatment timeline. Something's come up that might affect our scheduling." Marcus felt his stomach clench. In his experience, when doctors said something had come up, it was rarely good news. He glanced at Sophia, who was pretending to be absorbed in her coloring book, but clearly listening to every word. "Can we talk in the hallway?" Marcus asked. They stepped outside, leaving Sophia's door cracked so Marcus could keep an eye on her. While they spoke, Dr. Williams ran a hand through his graying hair. A gesture Marcus had learned indicated the doctor was about to deliver particularly complex information. "There's been an accident," Dr. Williams began. "A major car collision about an hour ago. Multiple casualties, including 2 children who are being rushed here for emergency surgery. Both have sustained severe trauma, and they're going to need every resource we have available in pediatric intensive care." Marcus nodded, not understanding yet how this affected Sophia, but knowing from the doctor's expression that it did. "The CAR T-cell therapy we discussed requires dedicated ICU space and specialized nursing staff," Dr. Williams continued. "With these emergency cases, we're going to be operating at full capacity for the foreseeable future. I'm afraid we'll need to delay Sophia's treatment by at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 2 weeks might not sound significant, but he knew enough about cancer to understand that timing mattered. Every day they waited was another day for the disease to potentially gain ground, another roll of the dice with his daughter's life. "Is it safe to wait?" Marcus asked, the question scraping against his throat. "Sophia's current treatment is still working," Dr. Williams assured him. "Her numbers are stable, and 2 weeks shouldn't significantly impact her prognosis. But I understand this creates additional complications for you financially." Additional complications. That was one way to put it. Marcus had been counting on the treatment happening within the originally planned time frame, had calculated his work schedule and finances around that deadline. 2 more weeks meant 2 more weeks of hospital visits, 2 more weeks of reduced work hours, 2 more weeks of mounting bills with no resolution in sight. "I need to see what resources might be available to help with costs," Dr. Williams said, his voice gentle but professional. "There are sometimes charitable foundations, assistance programs. Let me make some calls." After the doctor left, Marcus stood in the hallway for a long moment, watching the continued stream of medical personnel rushing toward the emergency department. Somewhere in this building, other families were facing their own impossible moments, their own life or death decisions. The thought should have provided perspective, but instead, it only amplified the helpless feeling that seemed to follow him everywhere these days. He returned to Sophia's room to find her sitting up straighter, her coloring book forgotten in her lap. She had inherited her mother's ability to read emotions in facial expressions, a skill that made it nearly impossible for Marcus to hide his worries from her. "Is my treatment going to be okay?" she asked with the direct honesty that 8-year-olds possessed before the world taught them to dance around difficult subjects. Marcus sat back down in his chair, reaching out to take her small hand in his. Dr. Williams needs to wait a little longer before we can start the new medicine. But he says you're doing really well with the medicine you're taking now. Sophia nodded seriously, processing this information with the gravity of someone who had learned too young that life was unpredictable and often unfair. Is it because of the sirens? The people who got hurt? Yes, Mia. The doctors need to help them first. That's okay, Sophia said, squeezing his hand. We can wait. Maybe the new medicine will work even better if we wait. Her acceptance, her willingness to find hope in disappointment, broke something open in Marcus's chest. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, marveling at the strength contained in such a small person. Sophia had faced every needle, every scan, every difficult day with a courage that humbled him. The afternoon dragged on with unusual tension. The normal rhythm of the hospital had been disrupted by the emergency, creating a sense of barely controlled chaos that rippled through every department. Nurses moved more quickly, conversations were shorter and more urgent, and even the housekeeping staff seemed to understand that every resource was needed elsewhere. Marcus tried to maintain normalcy. For Sophia's sake, reading to her from their book and helping with the math homework her teacher sent to the hospital each week. But his attention kept drifting to the sounds from the corridor, the rapid footsteps and urgent voices that indicated the emergency was far from over. Around 4 o'clock, a new doctor appeared in their doorway. She was younger than Dr. Williams, with short auburn hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she had been working without a break for hours. Her scrubs were wrinkled, and there was a coffee stain on her lab coat that she seemed unaware of. Mr. Rivera? I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the trauma surgeons. Dr. Williams asked me to speak with you about the emergency cases we're treating. Marcus followed her into the hallway, leaving Sophia with a promise to return in just a few minutes. Dr. Chun led him to a small consultation room he had never seen before. A windowless space with uncomfortable chairs and a box of tissues prominently displayed on the small table. The accident victims are 2 7-year-old twins, Dr. Chun began without preamble. Their car was hit by a drunk driver running a red light. Both children have sustained serious injuries, but they're stable now. However, they're going to require extensive recovery time in our ICU. Marcus nodded, wondering why this information was being shared with him specifically. The reason I'm telling you this is because of their mother, Dr. Chun continued. She's been asking about making a donation to help offset medical costs for other families dealing with pediatric treatment. Apparently, her family has significant resources, and she wants to do something meaningful while her sons recover. Something in Marcus's chest tightened. He had heard about wealthy families making charitable donations, had even secretly hoped that such generosity might somehow benefit Sophia. But the reality of being on the receiving end felt complicated in ways he hadn't anticipated. I don't want charity, Marcus said automatically, the pride that had sustained him through years of struggle rising up defensively. Dr. Chun raised a hand. It's not charity in the way you're thinking. She's specifically interested in funding innovative treatments that might not be fully covered by insurance. From what Dr. Williams tells me, your daughter would be an ideal candidate for the kind of program she wants to support. Marcus felt himself caught between gratitude and humiliation, between desperate hope and stubborn independence. He had worked his entire adult life to provide for his family, had never asked for handouts or expected anyone else to solve his problems. But this wasn't about his pride anymore. This was about Sophia's life. What would it involve? He asked. She wants to meet the family she's helping, Dr. Chun explained. Not for publicity or recognition, but because she believes in personal connection. She's lost people close to her, understands what it's like to feel powerless in a hospital. She wants to help, but she wants to do it in a way that honors the dignity of the family she's supporting. The conversation left Marcus feeling unmoored, as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted in subtle but significant ways. He had spent so much energy trying to figure out how to afford Sophia's treatment that the possibility of outside help felt surreal, too good to be true. He returned to Sophia's room to find her napping again, her small body curled around the stuffed elephant that never left her side. Marcus settled back into his chair and stared out the window at the city beyond, processing the day's unexpected developments. The emergency that had disrupted their timeline might also have provided a solution he never could have imagined. Somewhere in this same hospital, a mother was sitting beside her own injured children, and instead of being consumed by grief and fear, she was thinking about how to help other families facing similar struggles. As evening approached the hospitals, emergency energy began to settle into a more sustainable rhythm. The immediate crisis had passed, though Marcus could see from the continued activity in the hallway that the recovery process would be long and complex. Dr. Williams stopped by. During evening rounds, his expression more optimistic than it had been earlier in the day. "I've spoken with Dr. Shun about the potential funding assistance," he said. "If you're interested in meeting with Mrs. Harrison, she's available tomorrow afternoon." Mrs. Harrison. The name felt significant somehow, though Marcus couldn't place why. He agreed to the meeting, knowing that Sophia's future might depend on his willingness to accept help from a stranger. That night, as the hospital settled into its quieter overnight rhythm, Marcus lay in his uncomfortable chair and thought about the strange interconnectedness of human experience. The accident that had delayed Sophia's treatment had also brought them into contact with someone who might make that treatment possible. The emergency that had seemed like another obstacle might actually be the door to a solution. Through the window, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing lives being lived, struggles being fought, and connections being made in ways that the participants might never fully understand. Marcus closed his eyes and allowed himself to hope that tomorrow would bring clarity, and perhaps the beginning of an answer to prayers he had been afraid to voice. In the bed beside him, Sophia slept peacefully, her breathing steady and strong. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever difficult conversations or emotional revelations awaited, Marcus knew that his daughter's courage would guide him through. She had taught him that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep fighting despite it. The night stretched ahead, full of possibilities that Marcus was finally ready to embrace. The consultation room on the 4th floor felt smaller than it actually was, its beige walls and fluorescent lighting creating an atmosphere of institutional neutrality that seemed designed to contain difficult conversations. Marcus sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, his work-calloused hands folded in his lap as he waited for Mrs. Harrison to arrive. Dr. Chun had arranged the meeting for 2 o'clock, after Sophia's afternoon physical therapy session, giving Marcus time to prepare himself mentally for what felt like the most important conversation of his life. Through the single window, he could see the hospital's parking garage, its concrete levels filled with the cars of families dealing with their own medical crises. Somewhere among those vehicles was Mrs. Harrison's car, carrying a woman whose children lay in the ICU while she somehow found the strength to think about helping others. Marcus couldn't decide if that made her saint or someone so overwhelmed by grief that she was grasping for ways to make sense of senseless tragedy. The door opened, and Dr. Chun entered, followed by a woman who immediately commanded attention. Without seeming to try, she was perhaps 40 years old, with shoulder-length blonde hair that showed signs of having been hastily pulled back and released multiple times. Her clothes expensive but wrinkled, a silk blouse and tailored pants that had clearly been worn for more than 24 hours straight. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They were the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and intense, and there was something achingly familiar about them that made his breath catch in his throat. She moved with the controlled exhaustion of someone running on adrenaline and determination. Her designer handbag clutched like a lifeline in hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Mr. Rivera, this is Rebecca Harrison, Dr. Chun said, gesturing toward the empty chair across from Marcus. Mrs. Harrison, Marcus Rivera. Rebecca Harrison extended her hand, and when Marcus stood to shake it, their eyes met fully for the first time. The recognition hit him like a lightning strike. 15 years of buried memories flooding back in a single devastating moment. Those eyes, older now and marked by grief, were the same ones that had looked down at him with desperate concern as he lay bleeding on a rain-soaked street corner. The same voice that had called 911 and stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. The memories crashed over him in vivid detail. 23 years old, working late on a construction site in downtown Chicago. Walking to his beat-up Honda after a 16-hour shift installing drywall in what would become luxury condominiums. The rain had been coming down in sheets, turning the streets into rivers and making visibility nearly zero. He had been crossing against the light, exhausted and eager to get home to the small apartment he shared with 2 other guys, when the delivery truck ran the red light. The impact had thrown him 30 feet, his body skidding across the wet asphalt. Like a rag doll. He remembered the taste of blood in his mouth, the strange floating sensation that came with serious head trauma, and the sound of his own breathing becoming labored and irregular. He had been alone, another anonymous construction worker in a city full of them, and he was going to die on that street corner with no one to witness his passing. Then she had appeared, a young woman in an expensive coat who had been walking to her car when she witnessed the accident. She had knelt beside him in the rain, her knees soaking through her designer jeans as she pressed her hands against the worst of his wounds and spoke to him in a voice that cut through the fog of shock and pain. "Stay with me," she had said. Her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Help is coming. What's your name?" "Marcus," he had managed to whisper through the blood filling his mouth. "I'm Rebecca," she had replied. "I'm not going anywhere, Marcus. Keep looking at me." She had stayed with him for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, her hands maintaining pressure on his wounds while she gave rapid, precise information to the 911 dispatcher. When the paramedics arrived, she had ridden in the ambulance, holding his hand as they worked to stabilize him for the race to the trauma center. Marcus had spent 3 weeks in the hospital, fighting through internal bleeding, a punctured lung, and a traumatic brain injury that left him with gaps in his memory and coordination problems that took months to overcome. When he was finally able to ask about the woman who had saved his life, the nurses told him she had left contact information. But by then Marcus was drowning in medical bills and the shame of being uninsured and unemployable. He had lost her business card during one of his many moves between temporary housing situations, and his attempts to find her through the hospital had been unsuccessful. The memory of her face had grown hazy over the years, but her voice had stayed with him. That calm certainty that had kept him anchored to consciousness when everything else was slipping away. Now she sat across from him in this sterile hospital room, 15 years older and facing her own medical crisis, completely unaware that the man she was about to help had once owed his life to her intervention on a rain-soaked street corner. "Please, sit down," Rebecca said, her voice still carrying that same steady quality that had once kept him tethered to life. "Dr. Chun tells me your daughter is facing some treatment challenges." Marcus lowered himself back into his chair, his mind reeling as he tried to process the impossible coincidence that had brought them together again. Rebecca opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a folder thick with papers, her movements efficient despite the obvious exhaustion in her posture. "I want to be direct about my situation," she began, her gray-blue eyes meeting his steadily. "My sons were injured in a car accident yesterday. They're stable now, but their recovery is going to be long and difficult. While I'm sitting in this hospital, feeling helpless and afraid, I realized that there might be a way to channel some of that energy into something positive." She paused, brushing a strand of hair back from her face with a gesture that triggered another flash of memory. Marcus remembered that same gesture, performed with hands covered in his blood as she tried to keep him calm while they waited for medical help. "I've been fortunate in my life," Rebecca continued, unaware of the storm of recognition playing across Marcus's features. "My family built a successful business, and I have resources that most people don't. I can't make sense of why my children were hurt, but I can try to make sure that other children get the help they need." Dr. Chun leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Harrison has established a fund specifically for families dealing with pediatric cancer treatment costs. She's particularly interested in supporting innovative therapies that might not be fully covered by insurance." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Why specifically?" Rebecca's expression softened, revealing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "Dr. Williams told me about your daughter's case, about the CART therapy she needs. But more than that, he told me about you. How you've been here every day, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, working whatever jobs you can find to pay for her treatment. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who refused to give up even when everything seemed impossible." The irony was so profound that Marcus felt momentarily dizzy. She was using his own story, his own refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds, as the reason to help him, not knowing that she had been the one who made that survival possible in the first place. "I need you to understand that this isn't charity," Rebecca said, her voice taking on a fierce quality that Marcus remembered from that night 15 years ago. "This is about making sure that courage and love are enough. Your daughter deserves every possible chance. And if I can provide that chance, then some good comes out of this nightmare we're all living through." Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal the depth of his emotional turmoil. "I don't know what to say. This is more than I ever expected, more than I dared to hope for." "Say you'll let me help," Rebecca replied simply. "Say you'll give your daughter the best possible chance to beat this disease." Dr. Chun spread several documents across the small table, explaining the details of the funding arrangement. The paperwork was complex, involving medical trust accounts and treatment protocols. But the essence was simple. Rebecca Harrison would cover all costs related to Sophia's CAR-T therapy that weren't covered by insurance, including the extended hospital stay, specialized nursing care, and follow-up treatments. As they reviewed the documents, Marcus found himself studying Rebecca's face, looking for signs of the young woman who had saved his life. The years had added lines around her eyes and a weariness to her expression that spoke of losses and struggles he knew nothing about. But the fundamental strength was still there, the same determination that had kept her kneeling in the rain beside a dying stranger. "There's one thing I need to tell you," Rebecca said as they neared the end of their discussion. "I plan to be very involved in the cases I support. Not in a way that interferes with medical decisions, but I want to know the families, to follow their progress. Is that something you'd be comfortable with?" Marcus nodded, though the prospect of sustained contact with Rebecca filled him with a complex mixture of gratitude and anxiety. How could he maintain a relationship with her while carrying the secret of their shared past? How could he look into those storm-gray eyes day after day and not tell her that she had already saved his life once? "My sons will be in the hospital for several weeks," Rebecca continued. "I'll be here most days anyway. Perhaps we could coordinate our visits, let the children meet. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone in fighting these battles." The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to begin the treatment process. As soon as the IQ space became available, Dr. Chun gathered the signed documents, assuring both of them that everything would be fast-tracked once the immediate emergency cases stabilized. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she turned back to Marcus with a small, sad smile. "Your daughter is lucky to have a father who fights so hard for her. Not every child has that kind of advocate." "She's the strongest person I know," Marcus replied, the words carrying weight beyond their surface meaning. "She's taught me that Survival isn't about avoiding pain, it's about finding reasons to keep going despite it. Rebecca's expression shifted, something flickering across her features that suggested his words had touched a deeper chord. That's very wise. I hope I can learn some of that strength from her. After she left, Marcus remained in the consultation room for several minutes, trying to process what had just occurred. The woman who had saved his life 15 years ago had just saved his daughter's life, and she had no idea of the connection between them. The coincidence felt too massive to be random, too perfectly orchestrated to be mere chance. But perhaps that was the wrong way to think about it. Perhaps there were no coincidences, only patterns too complex for human understanding. Perhaps Rebecca Harrison moved through the world leaving a trail of saved lives behind her, and this was simply the natural order of things for someone who instinctively rushed toward trouble instead of away from it. Marcus returned to Sophia's room to find her awake and alert, her dark eyes bright with curiosity about his extended absence. She had inherited her mother's ability to read his moods, and she immediately sensed that something significant had occurred. "Did you meet the lady who's going to help us?" Sophia asked, setting aside the puzzle she had been working on. "I did," Marcus said, settling into his familiar chair beside her bed. "Her name is Mrs. Harrison, and she has 2 boys who are sick. 2. She wants to make sure you get the best medicine possible." Sophia considered this information with the serious attention she gave to all matters related to her treatment. "Is she nice?" "She's very nice," Marcus replied, the understatement feeling inadequate to describe the woman who had twice altered the course of his life. "I think you'll like her when you meet her." "When will that be?" "Soon," Marcus said, though he had no idea how he would handle the emotional complexity of watching Sophia interact with the woman who had saved them both. "She wants to bring her boys to meet you when they're feeling better." Sophia nodded approvingly. "It'll be good to have friends here. Sometimes the hospital gets lonely." That evening, as Sophia dozed and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, Marcus stood at the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in this same building, Rebecca Harrison was probably sitting beside her own children's beds, wrestling with the same fears and hopes that kept him awake most nights. The knowledge that she was nearby, that their lives were once again intersecting in this place of healing and hope, filled Marcus with a sense of anticipation tinged with apprehension. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new opportunities to express gratitude he couldn't fully explain, new chances to build a relationship founded on a secret he wasn't sure he should ever reveal. But tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus felt something approaching peace. Sophia would get her treatment, his daughter would have every possible chance to beat the disease that threatened her life, and the woman who had given him that life was somehow, impossibly, going to be part of their future. The circle was closing in ways he never could have imagined, and Marcus found himself believing, perhaps for the first time since Sophia's diagnosis, that everything was going to be all right. The ICU on the 5th floor operated under different rules than the rest of the hospital. The lighting was dimmer, the sounds more muted, and every movement carried the weight of lives balanced on the edge between recovery and loss. Marcus had never been to this wing before, but Rebecca had asked him to meet her here, and he found himself walking the hushed corridors with the reverence of someone entering sacred space. Room 512 held Rebecca's world. Through the partially open door, Marcus could see the complex machinery that surrounded 2 small beds, monitors displaying the vital signs that had become Rebecca's new form of prayer. She sat in the narrow space between the beds, one hand resting on each of her sons, her attention split between the 2 most important people in her universe. Marcus knocked softly on the doorframe, not wanting to startle her in what was clearly a moment of private vigil. Rebecca looked up, and he was struck again by the exhaustion etched into her features. 3 days had passed since their meeting in the consultation room, and it was clear she had spent every minute of that time in this chair. "Come in," she whispered, gesturing toward a second chair that had been pulled close to the beds. "I want you to meet them." The boys were identical in the way that only twins could be, their dark hair and delicate features marking them as clearly Rebecca's children. They appeared to be sleeping, though Marcus could see the signs of serious medical intervention. The breathing tubes, the IV lines, the careful positioning that suggested internal injuries still healing. "This is Jake," Rebecca said, her hand resting on the boy closer to the window. "He's older by 4 minutes and never lets Daniel forget it." "And this is Daniel," she continued, her voice catching slightly as she touched the second boy's arm. "He's the dreamer, always building castles in the air and trying to convince his brother to move in." Marcus settled into the chair, feeling like an intruder in this intimate space. "How are they doing?" "Better each day," Rebecca replied, though her voice carried the careful optimism of someone who had learned not to count on anything. "Jake's lung is healing well, and Daniel's internal bleeding has stopped. The doctors say they'll both make full recoveries, but it's going to take time." She turned to look at Marcus directly, and he saw something in her expression that he recognized from his own face during Sophia's worst days, the particular exhaustion that came from loving someone whose life hung in the balance. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Rebecca said. "About your daughter and what you said about survival being about finding reasons to keep going. I've been trying to apply that philosophy to the situation." Marcus nodded, understanding the struggle to find meaning in senseless suffering. "What reasons have you found?" Rebecca's smile was small but genuine. "Meeting you for one. Learning about Sophia and realizing that I can use this experience to help other families. It doesn't make what happened to my boys any less terrible, but it gives the pain a purpose." The irony of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. She was finding meaning in helping him, never knowing that he represented her own past act of heroism coming full circle. The weight of that secret grew heavier each time they spoke, a burden that seemed to expand rather than settle with time. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Rebecca continued, reaching into the bag beside her chair. "I've been working with Dr. Williams on the timeline for Sophia's treatment. The IQ space should be available next week, which means we can start the preparation process." She pulled out a folder filled with medical documents and treatment schedules, the same efficient organization Marcus had witnessed during their first meeting. But now he could see the tremor in her hands as she sorted through the papers, the way her composure threatened to crack under the strain of managing multiple crises simultaneously. "You don't have to do this now," Marcus said gently. "You have enough to worry about with your own sons." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "This helps me. Having something productive to focus on when I can't do anything for Jake and Daniel keeps me from going insane with helplessness." She spread the documents across the small table beside Jake's bed, and Marcus marveled at the thoroughness of her preparation. Every aspect of Sophia's treatment had been researched, every potential complication anticipated, every financial detail arranged. It was the work of someone who refused to leave anything to chance. "I've also been thinking about what I mentioned before about the children meeting each other," Rebecca said. "I know it might seem premature given their conditions, but I believe there's real therapeutic value in connecting with other families going through similar struggles." Marcus found himself torn between gratitude for her thoughtfulness and concern for the emotional complexity such a meeting would create. Watching Sophia interact with Rebecca, seeing his daughter form a bond with the woman who had saved his life, would test his ability to maintain his secret in ways he wasn't sure he was prepared for. Sophia would love that, he said, because it was true despite his reservations. She gets lonely sometimes, especially on the days when the treatment makes her too tired to engage with the other kids on her ward. "Then we'll make it happen," Rebecca said with the decisive tone of someone accustomed to turning plans into reality. "Maybe we could arrange something in the family lounge on the 3rd floor. Neutral territory where both kids can feel comfortable." They spent the next hour going through the treatment details, Rebecca asking questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of the medical process. Marcus learned that she had spent her 3 days in the ICU not just sitting vigil, but educating herself about pediatric medicine with the intensity of someone preparing for a doctoral exam. "You've done incredible research," Marcus observed as they concluded their review of the documents. Rebecca's laugh held no humor. "Knowledge feels like the only weapon I have against the helplessness. If I understand every detail of what's happening to my children, maybe I can find ways to influence the outcome." The words resonated with Marcus's own experience of frantically researching Sophia's condition in the early days after her diagnosis. The medical terminology had been overwhelming at first, but gradually he had built a vocabulary of hope and fear, learning to read lab results and understand treatment protocols with the desperate fluency of a parent whose child's life depended on such knowledge. "It doesn't make you feel less helpless though, does it?" Marcus asked. Rebecca met his eyes, and in that moment, the careful composure she maintained slipped entirely. "No, it just gives me something to do with the helplessness. Besides scream." The honesty of her admission created a moment of connection that transcended the formal nature of their relationship. Marcus found himself wanting to offer comfort, to share the burden of her fear in the same way she was sharing the burden of Sophia's treatment costs. But how could he explain that her pain mattered to him in ways that went beyond gratitude, that her well-being had been important to him for 15 years before they ever met in that consultation room? A soft sound from one of the beds drew their attention back to the boys. Daniel was stirring, his eyelids fluttering as he fought his way back to consciousness. Rebecca was beside him instantly, her hand smoothing his hair as she whispered reassurances. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured. "Mommy's here. You're safe." Daniel's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused as he tried to orient himself to his surroundings. When his gaze found Rebecca's face, Marcus watched relief wash over the child's features with heartbreaking intensity. "Mommy," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning. "Where's Jake?" "Right here, baby," Rebecca said, gently turning Daniel's head so he could see his brother sleeping in the next bed. "He's getting better, just like you are." Daniel tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. Rebecca supported him carefully, her movements practiced from days of helping him navigate the limitations imposed by his condition. "Who's that?" Daniel asked, noticing Marcus for the first time. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he looked into the boy's eyes, seeing echoes of Rebecca's storm-gray gaze and the child's curious expression. "I'm Marcus," he said softly. "I'm a friend of your mom's. Are you sick too?" Daniel asked with the direct honesty that children brought to difficult subjects. "No, but my daughter is," Marcus replied. "Your mom is helping us make sure she gets the best medicine." Daniel nodded solemnly, processing this information with the gravity of someone who had learned too young that the world contained suffering that adults couldn't always fix. "What's wrong with her?" "She has something called cancer," Marcus explained. "But the doctors have special medicine that can help her get better." "Cancer is scary," Daniel said matter-of-factly, "but the doctors here are really good. They saved me and Jake." The simple faith in the child's voice, his absolute confidence in the healing power of medicine and the people who administered it, created a lump in Marcus's throat that made speaking difficult. How did children maintain such optimism in the face of experiences that left adults questioning everything they believed about fairness and justice? Rebecca helped Daniel settle back against his pillows, her movements gentle but efficient. "Mr. Marcus's daughter is about your age," she told her son. "Maybe when you're feeling stronger, you could meet her." "I'd like that," Daniel said, his eyelids already growing heavy as the effort of conversation took its toll. "Does she like to draw?" "I'm really good at drawing horses." "I'll ask her," Marcus promised, though he already knew Sophia would be delighted to meet someone who shared her love of art. As Daniel drifted back to sleep, Rebecca returned to her chair between the beds, her attention once again split between her two wounded children. Marcus watched her in the dim light of the ICU, marveling at the strength required to maintain hope in such circumstances. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, the words emerging before he could consider their appropriateness. Rebecca looked at him with surprise. "I'm just doing what any mother would do." "Not every mother could handle this with such grace," Marcus said. "You're not just surviving this, you're finding ways to help other people while you're going through. That takes a special kind of strength." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "Some days I don't feel strong at all. Some days I feel like I'm held together with nothing but stubborn refusal to fall apart. Maybe that's what real strength is," Marcus suggested. "Not the absence of fear or doubt, but the decision to keep going despite them." She smiled at that, a small expression that transformed her exhausted features. "You have a wise way of looking at things. Your daughter is lucky to have a father who understands that perspective." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Martinez, the boys' attending physician, who needed to examine Daniel and review his latest test results. Marcus took this as his cue to leave, but Rebecca walked him to the elevator, leaving her sons in the capable hands of their medical team. "Thank you for coming up here," she said as they waited for the elevator to arrive. "It means more than you know to have someone who understands what this feels like." Marcus wanted to tell her that he understood in ways she couldn't imagine, that her strength had sustained him through his own darkest hour 15 years ago. Instead, he simply nodded. "We'll get through this, all of us. Together, Rebecca." Agreed, and the word carried weight beyond its surface meaning. As the elevator doors closed between them, Marcus found himself thinking about the interconnectedness of human experience, the way past acts of kindness could ripple forward through time to create new opportunities for grace. Rebecca Harrison had no idea that her willingness to help strangers had once saved his life, just as she had no idea that he would walk through fire to protect her children if the situation ever demanded it. The secret he carried felt like both a burden and a gift, a knowledge that added depth to every interaction while creating an emotional complexity he wasn't sure how to navigate. But as he returned to Sophia's room to share the news about the upcoming treatment, Marcus found himself grateful for the mysterious forces that had brought them together again. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but perhaps they could be honored through the building of new relationships founded on mutual support and shared hope. Perhaps the best way to thank someone for saving your life was to help them save others, creating an endless chain of rescue and renewal that stretched far beyond the understanding of any single participant. The circle was closing, and Marcus was beginning to believe that some stories were too important to be left to chance. The family lounge on the 3rd floor had been transformed into something resembling a cheerful living room, with colorful beanbags arranged around low tables and artwork from young patients covering the walls. Sophia sat cross-legged on a purple cushion, her thin frame swimming in the oversized hospital gown she insisted on wearing because it had cartoon pandas on it. Her recent chemotherapy session had left her pale and tired, but her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she waited to meet the boys Rebecca had told her about. Marcus watched from a nearby chair as Rebecca wheeled Daniel into the room, Jake walking slowly beside them with the careful gait of someone still recovering from serious injuries. Both boys looked fragile in the fluorescent lighting, their matching hospital bracelets and cautious movements marking them as fellow travelers in the world of pediatric medicine. But their eyes held the same curiosity that Marcus recognized in Sophia when she met other children who understood her daily reality. "Sophia, I'd like you to meet my sons," Rebecca said, positioning Daniel's wheelchair near the beanbag where Sophia sat. "This is Daniel, and this is Jake." Sophia offered a shy smile, her natural friendliness tempered by the social awkwardness that came with months of isolation from children her own age. "Hi, I'm Sophia. Your mom told my dad that you like to draw horses. Daniel's face lit up with enthusiasm that temporarily erased the pain lines around his eyes. I love horses. Do you draw them too? I'm better at cats, Sophia admitted. But my dad says practice makes everything better, so maybe you could teach me about horses and I could teach you about cats. The children's conversation flowed with the easy negotiation of new friendship, but Marcus found his attention divided between Sophia's obvious delight and Rebecca's expression as she watched the interaction unfold. There was something profound in her face, a mixture of joy and sorrow that spoke to the complex emotions of watching your children find connection despite the circumstances that had brought them together. Jake, quieter than his twin but clearly interested in the proceedings, settled onto a nearby beanbag with the careful movements of someone managing invisible pain. Are you having the same kind of surgery we had? He asked Sophia with the directness that serious illness seemed to foster in children. Different kind, Sophia explained matter-of-factly. I have cancer, so the doctors are going to take some of my blood and make it super strong, then put it back in to fight the bad cells. That sounds scary, Daniel observed, his artistic hands already reaching for the crayons scattered across the low table. Sophia shrugged with the philosophical acceptance that Marcus had learned to both admire and grieve. Everything here is a little scary at first, but the doctors are really good and my dad stays with me, so it's not too bad. Rebecca caught Marcus's eye across the room, her expression conveying gratitude and something deeper that he couldn't quite identify. She had been spending increasing amounts of time away from the ICU as her boys grew stronger, and Marcus had noticed how she seemed to draw energy from their conversations about Sophia's treatment and progress. Mr. Marcus helped save us, Jake told Sophia quietly, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the significance of such intervention. Sophia looked at her father with pride that made Marcus's chest tighten. My dad saves people. That's what he does. The simple statement, delivered with absolute conviction, hit Marcus with unexpected force. In Sophia's worldview, her father was a hero not because of any single dramatic act, but because he showed up every day, fought for her treatment, and refused to let her face her battles alone. It was a perspective that reframed his understanding of heroism itself. The afternoon unfolded with the gentle rhythm of children getting to know each other. Daniel shared his horse drawings while Sophia showed off her collection of origami cranes, each one representing a day she had completed treatment. Jake, the more reserved twin, gradually opened up about his love of building things, describing elaborate structures he planned to create when he was strong enough to return home. Rebecca and Marcus found themselves in the role of supporting players, occasionally facilitating conversation, but mostly watching in amazement as their children built bridges of understanding across their different experiences of illness and recovery. There was something healing in witnessing the resilience of childhood friendship, the way connection could flourish even in the sterile environment of a hospital. They're remarkable, Rebecca said softly, positioning herself in the chair beside Marcus as the children became absorbed in a collaborative art project involving horses, cats, and what appeared to be a fantastical castle. All of them, Marcus agreed, though his gaze lingered on Rebecca's profile as she watched her sons with fierce maternal protectiveness. You've raised incredible boys. You've raised an incredible daughter, Rebecca replied. The strength it must take to face what she's facing with such grace. She's learned that from watching you. The conversation was interrupted by Sophia's excited voice as she held up a drawing that combined Daniel's horses with her own cats in a scene that defied both artistic convention and biological possibility. Look, they're friends and they live in the same house, and they have adventures together. That's perfect, Daniel declared with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old art critic. They need names, though. The naming process became an elaborate negotiation involving personality traits, favorite colors, and the specific adventures the animals would undertake. Marcus marveled at the children's ability to create entire worlds from crayon marks on paper, to find joy and wonder despite their circumstances. As the afternoon wore on, fatigue began to show in all three children. Daniel's energy flagged first, his recent trauma requiring more rest than his enthusiasm wanted to acknowledge. Jake, despite his stoic nature, was clearly fighting exhaustion, while Sophia's periodic treatments left her with unpredictable waves of tiredness that could arrive without warning. "I think we should call this a successful first meeting," Rebecca suggested, beginning to gather the artwork scattered across the table. "But I hope this is just the beginning of many visits. Can we do this again tomorrow?" Sophia asked, though. Marcus could see the weariness in her eyes that belied her eager words. "Soon," Rebecca promised, "when everyone's feeling stronger." The logistics of departure required careful coordination between wheelchairs, walking assistants, and the various medical equipment that traveled with each child. Marcus found himself naturally falling into step beside Rebecca as they made their way back toward the elevators, their children chatting softly about future artistic collaborations and shared adventures. "Rebecca," Marcus said as they waited for the elevator, his voice carrying a weight that made her turn to look at him directly. "There's something I need to tell you." The elevator arrived before he could continue, filling with the bustle of their small group and making private conversation impossible. But something in his tone had caught Rebecca's attention, and Marcus could feel her curious gaze on him as they rode to their respective floors. "Can we talk later?" he asked as they prepared to part ways. "After the children are settled?" Rebecca nodded, though her expression suggested she had detected the serious undercurrent in his request. "I'll be in the family lounge on 5 around 8, after the boys are asleep." The evening hours passed with excruciating slowness as Marcus helped Sophia with her dinner, assisted with her evening medications, and read 3 chapters from their current book about a girl who discovered she could communicate with animals. Sophia was full of chatter about her new friends, planning elaborate scenarios for their next meeting and expressing concern about when Daniel would be strong enough to walk around more. "Dad," Sophia said as Marcus tucked her blanket around her shoulders, "are you worried about something?" Her perceptiveness never ceased to amaze him. Despite her illness, despite the medications that sometimes made her thoughts fuzzy, Sophia remained attuned to the emotional currents around her with startling accuracy. "Just thinking about some grown-up stuff," Marcus said, which was both true and inadequate. "About Mrs. Rebecca?" Sophia asked with the directness that made deception impossible. Marcus sat down in his familiar chair beside her bed, considering how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. "She's become very important to us, hasn't she?" Sophia nodded seriously. "She saved us. And she's really nice to her boys, even when they're sick and scared. I think she's special." "She is special," Marcus agreed, feeling the weight of 15 years of gratitude pressing against his chest. "More special than she knows." By 8 o'clock, Sophia was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and untroubled. Marcus made his way to the 5th floor, his heart beating with the irregular rhythm of someone approaching a moment that would change everything. The family lounge was empty except for Rebecca, who sat near the windows overlooking the city, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. "Thank you for waiting," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. "What I need to tell you is complicated, and I wasn't sure how to begin." Rebecca set down her coffee, giving him her full attention with the focused intensity he had come to recognize as characteristic of her approach to important matters. "Is it about Sophia's treatment? Have there been complications?" "No, it's not about Sophia," Marcus said, then paused to gather his courage. "It's about us. About something that happened 15 years ago." He could see confusion in Rebecca's expression, followed by the beginning of concern as she tried to understand what he was referring to. Marcus took a deep breath and began the story he had been carrying alone for 3 weeks. 15 years ago, I was a construction worker, 23 years old, working on a project downtown. It was raining that night, one of those storms that turns the streets into rivers. I was walking to my car after a long shift, not paying attention to traffic lights because I was exhausted and eager to get home. Rebecca's expression began to shift as Marcus spoke, something flickering in her eyes that suggested the beginning of recognition. A delivery truck ran a red light and hit me, Marcus continued. Threw me 30 feet across the intersection. I was lying there in the rain, bleeding internally, probably dying, and I thought that was it. 23 years old and dying alone on a street corner with no one to witness my passing. Rebecca's hand had moved to cover her mouth, her storm gray eyes widening with realization. But then someone appeared, Marcus said, his voice growing thick with emotion. A young woman in an expensive coat who had seen the accident. She knelt beside me in the rain, pressed her hands against my wounds, called 911, and stayed with me until the paramedics arrived. She rode in the ambulance, held my hand while they worked to keep me alive. Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, her free hand reaching across the small table toward Marcus, as if to confirm he was real. Her name was Rebecca, Marcus finished. She saved my life that night. And 15 years later, she's saving my daughter's life, not knowing that the man she's helping owes his very existence to her intervention on a rain-soaked street corner. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of recognition and the overwhelming magnitude of coincidence that seemed too perfect to be random. Rebecca's tears fell steadily as she stared at Marcus, seeing not just the father of a sick child she had chosen to help, but the young man whose blood had stained her hands and whose life she had fought to preserve. Marcus, she whispered, his name carrying 15 years of wondering and worry. Oh my God, Marcus. I tried to find you afterward, tried to check on your recovery, but the hospital said you had been discharged and they couldn't give me contact information. I looked for you too, Marcus said, reaching across the table to take her outstretched hand. But I lost your card during one of my moves, and I had no idea how to find you. I never forgot, though. I never forgot your voice telling me to stay with you, never forgot the feeling of your hands keeping me anchored to life when everything else was slipping away. Rebecca rose from her chair and moved around the table, pulling Marcus into an embrace that bridged 15 years of separation and gratitude. They held each other in the quiet family lounge, two people whose lives had intersected in tragedy and reunion, whose paths had crossed in ways that defied explanation. I can't believe it's you, Rebecca sobbed against his shoulder. I can't believe that after all these years, helping your daughter brought you back into my life. Maybe some debts can only be repaid in circles, Marcus said, his own tears falling freely now. Maybe the universe has a way of making sure that acts of kindness come back to the people who perform them. They pulled apart slowly, both needing to see each other's faces to confirm the reality of their reunion. Rebecca's hands framed Marcus's face, as if she were checking for signs of the injuries she had once helped heal, while Marcus marveled at the woman, the young stranger who had saved him, had become. All this time when I was helping with Sophia's treatment, I felt this connection I couldn't explain, Rebecca said. Something about your strength, your determination to fight for her, reminded me of something important. Now I know what it was. It was the memory of someone who refused to give up, someone who kept fighting, even when everything seemed hopeless. You taught me how to fight, Marcus replied. That night on the street, you showed me what it looked like when someone refuses to let another person surrender. I've been trying to honor that lesson ever since. The revelation reframed everything that had passed between them, every conversation and shared moment taking on new meaning in light of their hidden history. The formal boundaries of benefactor and recipient dissolved, replaced by the profound intimacy of two people whose lives had been permanently intertwined by a moment of crisis and courage. What happens now? Rebecca asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. Now we stop pretending we're strangers, Marcus said. Now we acknowledge that some connections are too deep to be casual, too meaningful to be hidden behind politeness and gratitude. The children, Rebecca said, suddenly thinking of the implications for Sophia, Jake, and Daniel. Will be fine, Marcus finished. Better than fine. They'll grow up knowing that the world contains people who show up for each other, who find ways to weave their lives together in patterns of mutual support and love. As they sat together in the family lounge, hands intertwined and hearts full of wonder at the mysterious workings of fate, Marcus felt the completion of a circle that had been 15 years in the making. Rebecca Harrison had saved his life twice now, once with her hands and once with her generosity. And in return, he had given her the gift of purpose during her own family's crisis. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights representing lives being lived and connections being made in ways the participants might never fully understand. But sometimes, Marcus thought, the universe revealed its hand, showed the hidden threads that connected all human experience in a tapestry of rescue and redemption that defied explanation but demanded gratitude. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sophia's treatment would continue, and Rebecca's boys would face their own recovery journey. But they would face it all together now, not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as family chosen by fate and confirmed by love. The circle was complete, and the story that had begun on a rain-soaked street corner 15 years ago had found its way home. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the large windows of Sophia's new bedroom, casting golden rectangles across walls painted in her favorite shade of lavender. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching his daughter carefully arrange her collection of origami cranes on the shelves Rebecca had installed the week before. Each paper bird represented a milestone in Sophia's treatment journey, and seeing them displayed in their new home felt like witnessing a gallery of small miracles. "Dad, do you think Jake and Daniel will like their rooms?" Sophia asked, turning from her crane arrangement with the careful movements of someone still rebuilding strength. The CAR-T therapy had been successful beyond anyone's most optimistic projections, but recovery remained an ongoing process that required patience and celebration of incremental progress. "I think they're going to love everything about this place," Marcus replied, stepping into the room that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. "Especially the art studio Rebecca designed for all of you." The house had been Rebecca's idea, presented not as charity, but as a practical solution to a complex situation. With Sophia requiring ongoing medical monitoring and the boys needing extended physical therapy, it made sense for the families to share living space near the hospital. What Rebecca hadn't mentioned until the architectural plans were already drawn was that the house was being purchased in both their names, a permanent foundation for the family they had inadvertently created. Sophia moved to the window seat that overlooked the backyard, where construction workers were putting finishing touches on an elaborate playground designed specifically for children recovering from serious medical procedures. Every piece of equipment had been carefully selected for safety and accessibility, creating a space where healing could happen through play and laughter. "I can see Daniel's art easel from here," Sophia observed, pointing to the corner of the yard, where a covered outdoor studio was taking shape. "He's going to be so excited when he sees it." The integration of their lives had happened gradually, naturally, like streams finding their way to a common river. What began as coordinated hospital visits evolved into shared meals in the family lounge, then collaborative care schedules, and finally the inevitable acknowledgement that they function better as a unit than as separate families managing parallel crises. Marcus heard Rebecca's car pulling into the driveway, followed by the excited voices of Jake and Daniel as they prepared to see their new home for the first time. Their discharge from the hospital had been delayed by a minor setback in Jake's recovery, but today marked the official beginning of their life together as an intentionally chosen family. "They're here," Sophia called out, her energy level spiking. In the way that always amazed Marcus, Despite months of grueling treatment, his daughter's capacity for joy remained undiminished, perhaps even strengthened by her intimate knowledge of how precious normal moments could be. Marcus made his way downstairs, arriving in the front hallway just as Rebecca opened the door. She looked different outside the hospital setting, more relaxed in jeans and a comfortable sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the efficient ponytail she favored during medical crises. But it was her expression that struck him most profoundly, a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and deep contentment that spoke to the magnitude of the step they were taking together. Jake and Daniel burst through the doorway with the enthusiasm of children who had been cooped up in medical facilities for too long. Their physical recovery had progressed remarkably well, though both boys still moved with occasional careful consideration for injuries that were healing but not forgotten. "Whoa," Daniel breathed, taking in the open floor plan that connected the living areas in a flow designed to accommodate wheelchairs, medical equipment, and the general chaos of 3 children sharing space. "This is huge. And look at all the windows," Jake added, his more reserved nature evident in the way he cataloged details rather than expressing immediate emotional reactions. "You can see everything from in here." Sophia appeared at the top of the staircase, her face glowing with anticipation. "Want to see your rooms? I helped pick out some of the decorations." The tour that followed was a symphony of childhood excitement, punctuated by moments of adult wonder at how seamlessly the space accommodated their merged families' needs. Rebecca had worked with architects and medical consultants to create an environment that felt like a home rather than an institutional setting, while still incorporating features that would support ongoing recovery and potential future medical needs. Daniel's room reflected his artistic nature with built-in easels, supply storage designed like a treasure chest, and walls painted with a mural depicting wild horses running across an endless prairie. Jake's space emphasized his love of building and engineering, with a drafting table positioned near the window and shelving systems designed to display complex construction projects. "This is the best room ever," Daniel declared, running his hands along the custom easel that adjusted to accommodate sitting or standing positions. "I can paint horses every day if I want to." "Every day might be a bit much," Rebecca said with a laugh. That held no real concern, but definitely whenever inspiration strikes. The master suite had been designed with separation in mind. Rebecca's room on one side of the house and Marcus's on the other, connected by the common areas where their family life would unfold. It was an arrangement that acknowledged the complexity of their relationship while providing space for whatever evolution might naturally occur. That evening, after the boys had been settled into their new beds with the mixture of excitement and exhaustion that came with major life transitions, Marcus and Rebecca found themselves alone in the kitchen. The house felt different at night, larger somehow, filled with the potential of all the conversations and connections that would happen within its walls. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, voicing the question that had been cycling through his mind since Rebecca first proposed. "The living arrangement. It's a big step financially and emotionally." Rebecca was loading the dishwasher with the efficiency of someone who had managed complex logistics for months. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied without hesitation. "These past 6 months have shown me what family actually means. It's not about blood relationships or traditional structures. It's about showing up for each other consistently, especially when things get difficult." She paused in her work, turning to face Marcus directly. "Besides, you saved my life too, you know. Not just 15 years ago, though that was certainly significant. You saved me these past months by giving me a purpose beyond my own fear and grief. Helping Sophia, watching you fight for her, learning how to be part of something larger than my own family's crisis. It changed everything for me." Marcus felt the truth of her words settle into his chest, recognition of how their interdependence had evolved from practical necessity into something approaching love. Not the dramatic, overwhelming passion of movies and novels, but the steady, Reliable affection that grew from shared struggle and mutual respect. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of a conversation he had been postponing for weeks. "About my feelings for you, about what this arrangement means to me beyond the practical aspects." Rebecca set down the dish she had been holding, giving him her complete attention with the focus that had become familiar during their months of navigating medical crises together. "I'm falling in love with you," Marcus continued, the words emerging with less difficulty than he had anticipated. "Not because of what you've done for Sophia, though I'm grateful beyond words for that. And not because of some misplaced sense of debt from 15 years ago. I'm falling in love with who you are now, with the woman who turns crisis into opportunity and finds ways to build family from the raw materials of tragedy and hope." Rebecca's response was not immediate speech but movement, crossing the kitchen to stand close enough that Marcus could see the gold flecks in her storm-gray eyes. "I've been hoping you would say that," she admitted, her voice soft but certain. "Because I've been falling in love with you too. With your strength, your devotion to Sophia, your ability to see possibility in situations that would crush most people." The kiss that followed was tender rather than passionate, filled with months of careful consideration and the recognition that what they were building together was too precious to rush or take for granted. When they pulled apart, both were smiling with the quiet satisfaction of people who had finally acknowledged what everyone around them had already observed. "What do we tell the children?" Rebecca asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "The truth," Marcus replied. "That sometimes families form in unexpected ways, and that love can grow from friendship and shared purpose, just as powerfully as it can from romantic drama." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs, followed by Sophia's voice calling softly, "Dad? Are you down there?" Marcus and Rebecca exchanged a look of amused resignation. In a house with 3 children recovering from serious medical conditions, private moments would always be subject to interruption by legitimate needs and normal childhood anxiety about new environments. "I'm here, Mia," Marcus called back. "Everything okay?" Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair mused from restless sleep and her expression carrying the vulnerability that sometimes emerged when exhaustion lowered her usual brave defenses. "I had a dream about the hospital. Not a scary dream, but I woke up confused about where I was." Rebecca knelt down to Sophia's eye level, a gesture that had become natural over months of shared parenting responsibilities. "That happens sometimes. When we sleep in new places, your brain needs time to learn that this is home now. Is it really home?" Sophia asked, the question carrying layers of meaning about permanence and security that went beyond simple housing arrangements. "It's really home," Marcus confirmed, lifting Sophia into his arms with the careful attention to her still rebuilding strength that had become second nature. "For all of us. This is where we live now, where we're going to keep taking care of each other." Sophia looked around the kitchen, taking in the evidence of their merged life. Jake's homework on the counter next to Daniel's latest horse drawing, Rebecca's reading glasses beside Marcus's work gloves, the family calendar already dense with medical appointments, therapy sessions, and normal childhood activities. "Good," Sophia said with the satisfied tone of someone whose worldview had been confirmed rather than challenged. "I like it when we're all together." The months that followed established rhythms that surprised Marcus with their naturalness. Rebecca's business acumen proved invaluable when applied to household management, while Marcus's construction background made him the family's go-to problem solver for everything from leaky faucets to playground equipment assembly. The children adapted to their shared space with the flexibility that seemed hardwired into young people who had learned early that life required constant adjustment to changing circumstances. Sophia's medical progress continued to exceed expectations. Her latest scans showing no trace of cancer cells and her energy levels returning to something approaching normal for a growing 8-year-old. The success of her treatment became a source of hope for other families facing similar diagnoses, and Rebecca had quietly established a foundation that funded CAR-T therapy for children whose families couldn't afford the associated costs. Jake and Daniel's recovery proceeded more slowly, but with equal determination. Jake's interest in engineering had led to a correspondence with local college professors, who were impressed by his intuitive understanding of structural principles. Daniel's artistic abilities had flourished in his new environment, his horse paintings becoming increasingly sophisticated and earning recognition in a citywide competition for young artists. The first anniversary of their reunion passed quietly, marked not by dramatic celebration but by the accumulated evidence of lives successfully intertwined. Marcus found himself thinking often about the mysterious forces that had brought them together, the way Rebecca's impulse to help strangers had created a web of connection that reached across decades to bind their families in ways none of them could have imagined. On a warm evening in late spring, as the children played in the backyard under the watchful eyes of security, cameras that had been installed more for peace of mind than any real security concern, Marcus and Rebecca sat on the back porch watching their family enjoy the freedom of outdoor play that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of medical crisis. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night 15 years ago? Marcus asked, the question emerging from contemplation rather than regret. Rebecca considered this, her gaze following Daniel as he attempted to teach Sophia the finer points of horse anatomy using chalk drawings on the patio. I think about it sometimes, she admitted, but not with any sense of alternative possibilities. Stopping was never really a choice for me. It was just what you do when someone needs help. That's what makes you extraordinary, Marcus said, reaching over to take her hand in his. Most people would have driven past, especially in weather like that. Most people would have convinced themselves that someone else would handle it. I don't think that's true, Rebecca replied, though her smile suggested appreciation for his perspective. I think most people want to help. They just need permission to believe they can make a difference. The foundation Rebecca had established was providing exactly that permission, creating a framework for individuals and businesses to contribute to pediatric cancer treatment in ways that felt meaningful rather than token. The success stories were accumulating. Families whose children received life-saving treatment they couldn't afford. Medical research funded by donations that might have gone to less impactful causes. A network of support that extended far beyond financial assistance to include emotional resources and practical help. I have something to show you, Rebecca said, reaching into her bag for a folder that Marcus recognized as her preferred method for presenting important information. The foundation received an interesting letter this week. She handed him a handwritten note on expensive stationery, the careful script suggesting an elderly author who had taken time to craft each sentence with precision. Dear Mrs. Harrison, Marcus read aloud. My grandson was one of the first children to receive treatment through your foundation's assistance program. Tommy is now 3 years cancer-free and thriving in high school. He plans to study medicine with the goal of becoming a pediatric oncologist. I wanted you to know that your generosity created ripple effects you may never have imagined. Not only did you save Tommy's life, but you may have influenced him to dedicate his life to saving other children facing similar battles. Enclosed, please. Find a check representing my contribution to ensure that other families receive the same hope you gave us. With eternal gratitude, Margaret Chen. Marcus looked up from the letter to find Rebecca's eyes bright with unshed tears of satisfaction. Margaret Chen is Dr. Chen's mother, she explained. Sarah, the trauma surgeon who first connected us. Her grandson was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years ago. The interconnectedness of their story seemed to expand with each new revelation, connections, appearing and reappearing in patterns too complex to be coincidental, yet too meaningful to be dismissed as random chance. Marcus thought about the threads that connected all human experience, The way acts of kindness could ripple outward through time and space to create changes the original actors never witnessed. "There's something else," Rebecca continued, her tone shifting to accommodate information of particular significance. "The Foundation Board wants to establish a scholarship program for children who've survived serious medical conditions. They're asking if we'd be willing to have it named after our families to honor what our children have overcome." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the emotional overwhelm that came with being recognized for circumstances he would never have chosen, but had learned to navigate with grace. What would that involve? Public speaking mostly. Sharing our story with potential donors and other families. Being the faces of hope for people who are where we were 18 months ago. The prospect was both appealing and daunting. Marcus had grown comfortable with their private miracle. The way their merged family had found healing and happiness despite circumstances that could have destroyed them. Making their story public felt like sharing something sacred, but he also understood the potential impact of demonstrating that survival was possible, that families could emerge from medical crisis not just intact but strengthened. "What do the children think?" Marcus asked, knowing that Sophia, Jake, and Daniel would need to be comfortable with any increased public attention that came with such recognition. "We haven't discussed specifics with them yet," Rebecca replied. "But they've all expressed interest in helping other kids who are going through what they experienced. Sophia especially seems drawn to the idea of being a resource for other children facing cancer treatment." That evening, they gathered the children in the living room for a family meeting. A tradition that had evolved naturally as decisions affecting the household required input from all members. The democratic nature of their decision-making process had surprised Marcus initially, but he had come to appreciate how including the children in appropriate discussions gave them agency in their own lives while teaching valuable lessons about collective responsibility. "We have an opportunity to help other families," Rebecca began, settling onto the couch between Jake and Daniel while Sophia curled up in Marcus's lap. "But it would mean talking publicly about our experiences, sharing our story with people we don't know." Sophia's response was immediate and enthusiastic, like being heroes for other kids who are sick. "Something like that," Marcus confirmed. "But it would mean reporters might want to interview you and people might recognize you in public." Jake, ever the practical thinker, asked the question that was likely on all their minds. "Would we have to tell them about the accident? About how we got hurt?" Rebecca's hand found Jake's, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. "We would only share what we're comfortable sharing. The focus would be on recovery and hope, not on trauma or pain." "I think we should do it," Daniel said with the quiet certainty that characterized his most important pronouncements. "If our story can help other kids feel less scared, then it's important to tell it." The family vote was unanimous, though. Marcus suspected there would be moments of regret when the public attention became overwhelming or intrusive. But the potential to create hope for other families facing similar challenges outweighed their concerns about privacy and publicity. As summer arrived and the children grew stronger, their story began reaching wider audiences. The scholarship program launch generated significant media attention, with reporters drawn to the compelling narrative of lives intersecting across time in ways that seemed designed by forces beyond human understanding. Marcus found himself surprisingly comfortable in interviews, his natural tendency toward straightforward communication serving him well when describing their family's journey from crisis to stability. Rebecca's business background made her an effective advocate for systemic changes in how medical expenses were handled, while the children's articulate descriptions of their experiences provided emotional weight that statistics and policy arguments couldn't match. The most meaningful response came not from media coverage, but from the families who reached out directly, parents facing impossible decisions about their children's medical care, who found hope in learning that others had navigated similar circumstances successfully. The letters and emails accumulated, each one representing a family somewhere in the country, who felt less alone because someone had been willing to share their story publicly. "We're making a difference," Rebecca observed one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of correspondence from families whose children were receiving foundation support. Not just financially, but in terms of hope and community. Marcus agreed, though he remained amazed by the scope of impact that had grown from what began as a personal medical crisis. Their individual story had become part of a larger narrative about resilience, community support, and the ways that tragedy could be transformed into purpose. As the anniversary of Sophia's successful treatment approached, the family planned a celebration that would acknowledge how far they had all traveled. From the darkest days of uncertainty and fear, the party would be small, limited to the medical team who had guided them through treatment and a few friends who had provided support during the most difficult months. But the real celebration was quieter, more personal. The simple fact of their continued existence as a family unit that had been forged by crisis and strengthened by choice. They had survived the unthinkable and found ways to build something beautiful from the raw materials of fear and hope. The evening before the party, as the children played board games in the living room and their laughter filled the house with the sound of normalcy, Marcus and Rebecca stood together in the kitchen, cleaning dishes and marveling at the ordinary miracle of their shared life. "Do you think we would have found each other without the medical crisis?" Rebecca asked, a question she had posed before, but which felt new each time they considered it. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I'm grateful we didn't have to find out. This path, difficult as it was, brought us exactly where we needed to be." The future stretched ahead of them, filled with the normal challenges of raising children, managing careers, and maintaining relationships, but also brightened by the knowledge that they had already survived the worst that life could offer, and emerged not just intact but strengthened by the experience. Their story would continue to ripple outward through the Foundation's work, through the scholarship recipients who would go on to their own achievements, through the families who found hope in learning that survival was possible. But for Marcus and Rebecca, the most important chapter was being written daily in the accumulated moments of shared life, homework help and bedtime stories, medical appointments that were routine rather than crisis-driven, and the gradual understanding that happiness could be built from the most unlikely circumstances by people willing to show up for each other consistently and without reservation. The circle that had begun 15 years ago on a rain-soaked street corner was now complete, but it was also expanding, reaching outward to embrace other families, other children, other possibilities for transformation and hope. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but they could be honored through the creation of new opportunities for rescue and renewal, ensuring that acts of kindness would continue to ripple through time in patterns too complex to predict but too meaningful to ignore. 5 years had transformed everything and nothing. The house that had once felt impossibly spacious now hummed with the comfortable chaos of teenagers claiming their independence while still needing guidance. Sophia, now 13 and 3 years cancer-free, had inherited her father's stubborn determination along with her mother's artistic eye, channeling both into a passion for medical illustration that surprised no one who knew her story. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Marcus prepared coffee for what had become a sacred ritual, the daily family check-in before everyone scattered to their respective schools and activities. Rebecca sat at the kitchen island, laptop open as she managed foundation business from home, her reading glasses perched on her nose while she reviewed grant applications from families across the country. "Dad, can you sign my permission slip for the hospital volunteer program?" Sophia asked, sliding a crumpled paper across the counter while she wrestled with her backpack straps. "They need it today if I want to start next week." Marcus examined the document, noting that his 13-year-old daughter was requesting permission to spend her afternoons in the same pediatric oncology ward where she had once been a patient. The irony wasn't lost on him, though Sophia's desire to help other children facing cancer treatment seemed as natural as breathing to everyone who knew her. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia had been advocating for volunteer opportunities since her 11th birthday, arguing with the persistence of someone who understood exactly what sick children needed most. Hope delivered by someone who had walked the same path. "I've been ready since I got better," Sophia replied with the matter-of-fact confidence that had sustained her through treatment and recovery. "Besides, Mrs. Patricia specifically requested me for the art therapy program." Mrs. Patricia, the nurse, who had cared for Sophia during her darkest days, had maintained contact with their family long after medical necessity ended. Her request for Sophia's participation in the hospital's expanded art therapy initiative represented both professional recognition of Sophia's abilities and personal acknowledgement of how far she had traveled from patient to advocate. Jake appeared in the kitchen with the quiet efficiency that characterized his approach to most activities. At 14, he had grown tall and lean, his engineering interests evolving into a sophisticated understanding of biomedical device design that impressed university professors who reviewed his project submissions. His recovery from the accident had been complete, but the experience had left him with a profound appreciation for the intersection of technology and healing. "Mom, the prosthetics lab confirmed they want me for the summer internship," Jake announced, settling into his usual chair with a bowl of cereal. "They said my presentation on adaptive playground equipment was exactly the kind of thinking they're looking for." Rebecca looked up from her laptop, pride evident in her expression. "That's wonderful, honey. Are you comfortable with the time commitment?" Jake nodded seriously. 15 hours a week, flexible scheduling. "And they said if my work is good enough, they might help me apply for early admission to their engineering program." The conversation was interrupted by Daniel's dramatic entrance, his arms full of canvases and his hair streaked with paint in colors that suggested an early morning art session. At 14, he had embraced his artistic talents with an intensity that sometimes worried the adults in his life, though his therapist assured them that creative expression was a healthy way to process trauma and build identity. "The gallery confirmed the exhibition," Daniel announced without preamble, setting his artwork carefully against the kitchen wall. 20 paintings, opening reception next month, and they want to donate half the proceeds to the foundation. Marcus studied the paintings Daniel had arranged for display, marveling at how the boy's artistic vision had evolved from simple horse drawings to complex compositions that captured emotional landscapes with startling sophistication. The planned exhibition would be Daniel's first solo show, though his work had been featured in several group exhibitions over the past 2 years. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Rebecca said, moving to examine the paintings more closely. "Are you prepared for the public attention that comes with a solo exhibition?" Daniel shrugged with teenage nonchalance, though Marcus detected underlying nervousness in his posture. "It's not about me. It's about showing people that surviving something terrible can create beauty, not just damage." The wisdom in Daniel's statement struck Marcus with the force of accumulated truth. His children, all 3 of them, had transformed their experiences of medical crisis into purpose and meaning in ways that continued to amaze him. They hadn't simply survived their ordeals. They had alchemized suffering into service, fear into advocacy, and trauma into art. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming call, the distinctive ringtone she had assigned to Dr. Williams, interrupting their family breakfast. 5 years later, contact with their medical team remained regular though thankfully routine, focused now on research collaboration rather than crisis management. "Good morning, David," Rebecca answered, putting the call on speaker so the family could participate in the conversation. "Please tell me this is about the research paper and not any medical concerns." Dr. Williams's laughter came through clearly, warm with the affection that had developed between doctor and family over years of shared challenges and victories. Definitely research-related. The preliminary results from the long-term study are better than we dared hope. Sophia's case, along with the other children who received early CAR-T therapy, is showing remarkable durability in terms of cancer-free survival. Sophia looked up from her backpack packing, interest evident in her expression. Does that mean the treatment is working for other kids too? It means, Dr. Williams replied, that your experience was not just a personal success, but part of a larger breakthrough in pediatric oncology. The protocol we used for your treatment is now becoming standard care for children with your type of leukemia. The conversation continued for several minutes, covering technical details about survival rates, treatment modifications, and plans for expanding access to CAR-T therapy in developing countries. Marcus listened with the mixture of gratitude and amazement that had become his default response to reminders of how Sophia's individual medical journey had contributed to advances that would help thousands of other children. After the call ended, the family finished their breakfast preparations in comfortable silence, each member processing the morning's information in their own way. The knowledge that their personal struggles had contributed to medical advances that would benefit other families added weight to experiences that already carried profound meaning. I need to pick up the foundation board packets before school, Rebecca announced, gathering her materials with practiced efficiency. The quarterly meeting is Thursday, and we're reviewing applications for the new hospital partnership program. The foundation that had begun as Rebecca's response to crisis had evolved into a major force in pediatric medical funding, with partnerships in 12 hospitals and research institutions across the country. The success stories accumulated monthly, children receiving life-saving treatments, families avoiding financial ruin, medical researchers funded to pursue innovative approaches to childhood diseases. Are you still planning to announce the expansion to international programs? Marcus asked, helping Rebecca organize the documents that seemed to multiply daily as the foundation's scope increased. If the board approves the funding structure, Rebecca confirmed. We've identified partner hospitals in 4 countries where our support could make an immediate impact. The need is overwhelming, but so is the potential to save lives. Sophia paused in her backpack stuffing, a thought clearly forming in her mind. When I'm older, could I work for the foundation? Like, officially? Rebecca and Marcus exchanged a look that communicated volumes about their shared pride in Sophia's evolving sense of purpose. If that's what you want, Rebecca replied, I think you'd bring valuable perspective to our work. I want to help kids like I was helped, Sophia said with the simple clarity that had characterized her approach to life since recovery. But I also want to understand the science better, so I can explain things to families in ways that make sense. The ambition wasn't surprising, given Sophia's demonstrated ability to translate complex medical concepts into language that other children could understand. Her volunteer work at the hospital had already garnered attention from child life specialists, who were impressed by her natural ability to provide comfort and hope to newly diagnosed patients. Jake looked up from his cereal bowl, a thought apparently occurring to him. What if we coordinated our work? Sophia doing patient support, me developing better medical devices, Daniel creating art for healing environments. Like a family business, but for helping people. The Rivera Harrison Institute for Pediatric Innovation, Daniel suggested with the dramatic flair that accompanied most of his pronouncements. We could have the coolest mission statement ever. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion as he listened to his children plan their futures around service to others facing medical crises. The transformation from patients to advocates seemed complete, though he suspected their understanding of their own experiences would continue evolving as they matured. That's a beautiful vision, Rebecca said, her voice thick with the same emotional response Marcus was experiencing. But remember that you have time to explore different interests, to change your minds, to discover passions we haven't even imagined yet. I know, Sophia replied, but this feels right. This feels like what I'm supposed to do with the life you all helped save." The statement hung in the air for a moment, weighted with the accumulated gratitude and purpose that had shaped their family's trajectory for 5 years. Marcus thought about the 15-year circle that had brought him and Rebecca together, and wondered what new circles their children were beginning to draw with their own choices and commitments. The school departure routine unfolded with choreographed efficiency, backpacks grabbed, lunch money distributed, and final reminders called out as 3 teenagers headed toward their respective educational adventures. Marcus and Rebecca stood in the doorway, watching their children navigate the world with confidence earned through early confrontation with mortality and recovery. "Do you think we've done this right?" Rebecca asked, a question that emerged periodically as they navigated the complex territory of raising children who had survived experiences that most adults never faced. "I think," Marcus replied, watching Sophia help a neighbor load groceries into her car without being asked, "that they're becoming exactly who they're supposed to be." The morning settled into the quieter rhythm that characterized the house after the children's departure. Rebecca returned to her foundation work while Marcus prepared for his day, managing the construction company he had started 3 years earlier, focusing on building accessible medical facilities and adaptive housing for families dealing with chronic health conditions. The phone rang again, this time with the tone assigned to Elena, Marcus's sister, who called monthly to check on the family's progress and share updates about her own children's activities. The conversation that followed had become ritual, a touchstone that connected their current stability to the struggles that had preceded it. "How's everyone doing?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the warmth that had sustained Marcus through his darkest periods. "Thriving," Marcus replied, the word feeling insufficient to capture the complexity of their current reality. Sophia's starting hospital volunteer work, Jake got accepted for a biomedical engineering internship, and Daniel's having his first solo art exhibition. "And you? How are you handling all this success?" Marcus considered the question, thinking about the man who had lived in a trailer 6 years earlier, struggling to afford his daughter's medical treatment while carrying the secret weight of gratitude to a stranger who had saved his life. "I'm learning to accept that good things can last," he admitted. "That stability isn't necessarily temporary, and that families can be built from the most unlikely circumstances. You've all earned this happiness," Elena said firmly. "Don't let survivor guilt convince you otherwise." After ending the call, Marcus sat quietly in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their merged life, family photos covering the refrigerator, a calendar dense with medical appointments that were routine rather than crisis-driven, artwork from all 3 children covering available wall space. The transformation still amazed him. The way crisis had been alchemized into purpose and individual struggle had evolved into collective strength. Rebecca emerged from her home office, laptop closed and expression suggesting completion of important business. "The international expansion proposal is finished," she announced. "If the board approves it, we'll be able to fund pediatric cancer treatment in 23 countries by the end of next year." Marcus marveled at the scope of impact that had grown from what began as one woman's response to her own family's medical crisis. "Do you ever feel overwhelmed by how big this has become?" "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted, settling beside him on the couch that had become their preferred spot for important conversations. "But then I think about the letters we receive from families whose children are alive because of foundation support, and the scale feels appropriate to the need." The latest batch of correspondence sat on the coffee table, thank you notes and progress reports from families whose lives had been changed by foundation assistance. Marcus read them periodically, amazed by the ripple effects of individual acts of generosity and the way hope could be transmitted across geographical and cultural boundaries. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Rebecca continued, her tone shifting to accommodate information of particular significance. "The medical school contacted me about establishing a scholarship program specifically for students who want to specialize in pediatric oncology. They're proposing to name it after our family. Marcus felt the familiar mixture of honor and discomfort that accompanied public recognition. Their story had become a symbol of hope for other families facing medical crises. But the attention sometimes felt overwhelming for people who simply wanted to live normal lives while helping others navigate similar challenges. What would that involve? Marcus asked. Annual scholarship presentations, probably some speaking engagements at medical conferences. The usual public face responsibilities that come with having our names attached to programs. And the children? How do they feel about increased public attention? Rebecca smiled, an expression that suggested she had already had this conversation with Sophia, Jake, and Daniel. They're surprisingly comfortable with it. Sophia said that if talking about our experience helps train better doctors for sick kids, then privacy is less important than impact. The wisdom of their children continued to astound Marcus. At 13 and 14, they possessed emotional intelligence and clarity of purpose that many adults never developed. Their early confrontation with mortality had accelerated their maturity in ways that were both inspiring and occasionally heartbreaking. "Then I think we should do it," Marcus said. Decision emerging from accumulated trust in their family's ability to handle whatever challenges came with increased public responsibility. The afternoon brought a parade of typical activities, grocery shopping for a household that consumed food at rates that amazed Marcus, coordination of carpools for after-school activities, and the endless logistics of managing 3 teenagers whose interests required transportation to different locations across the city. Sophia's first day of hospital volunteering had been scheduled for the following week, but she had convinced the volunteer coordinator to let her observe the art therapy program that afternoon. Marcus drove her to the hospital, marveling at his daughter's calm confidence as she prepared to return to the building where she had spent months fighting for her life. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked as they walked through the familiar corridors that led to the pediatric wing. "A little," Sophia admitted, "but mostly excited. I know exactly what these kids are feeling, and I know what might help them feel less scared." The art therapy room had been transformed since Sophia's patient days, expanded and equipped with supplies that reflected the Foundation's ongoing support for creative healing programs. Mrs. Patricia met them at the door, her face lighting up with the special warmth she reserved for former patients who had become success stories. "Sophia, you look wonderful," Mrs. Patricia said, enveloping Sophia in a hug that bridged the gap between caregiver and former patient. "Are you ready to help some scared kids discover that art can make everything feel a little better?" "I've been ready for years," Sophia replied, and Marcus knew she meant it literally. The session that followed was remarkable to witness. Sophia moved among the young patients with natural empathy, offering technical advice about painting techniques while sharing carefully chosen details about her own treatment experience. Marcus watched from the observation area, amazed by his daughter's ability to provide hope without minimizing the legitimate fears that accompanied serious medical diagnoses. "She's extraordinary," Mrs. Patricia observed, joining Marcus near the window that overlooked the art therapy room. "The way she connects with these children is unlike anything I've seen in 25 years of pediatric nursing." "She remembers what it felt like," Marcus replied. "Not just the medical aspects, but the emotional landscape of being a child whose body had betrayed them." They watched as Sophia helped a 7-year-old boy mix colors for a painting that seemed to be evolving into a superhero story. The child's laughter was audible through the observation window, a sound that Marcus knew had been absent from his life since his cancer diagnosis 2 weeks earlier. "This is what healing looks like," Mrs. Patricia said quietly. "Not just the absence of disease, but the presence of hope and connection and purpose." The drive home was quiet, Sophia processing her first official return to the hospital as a volunteer rather than a patient. Marcus respected her need for silence. understanding that the experience had likely triggered complex emotions about her own journey from diagnosis to recovery. It felt good, Sophia finally said as they turned into their neighborhood. Scary. At first, because of all the memories, but then really good. Like I was supposed to be there, just in a different role than before. How did the other kids respond to you? They could tell I understood, Sophia replied. Not just intellectually, but really understood what they're going through. It made them feel less alone, I think. That evening, the family gathered for dinner with the addition of Dr. Chun, who had become a regular guest since her son Tommy completed his first year of medical school. The conversation flowed between topics that ranged from Sophia's volunteer experience to Jake's internship preparation to Daniel's exhibition planning. I have news about the scholarship program, Dr. Chun announced as they finished the main course. The medical school board approved the funding, and they want to launch it with a ceremony honoring your family's contributions to pediatric medicine. Marcus felt the familiar mixture of pride and humility that accompanied recognition for what had begun as a desperate fight for his daughter's life. What kind of ceremony? Nothing too overwhelming, Dr. Chun assured him. A dinner for medical faculty and students, some remarks about the importance of family-centered care, and the presentation of the first scholarships to students who've demonstrated commitment to pediatric oncology. Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand, a gesture that communicated her understanding of his complex feelings about public recognition. We'll do whatever helps train better doctors for children facing cancer, she said, speaking for both of them. And we want to be involved in selecting scholarship recipients, Sophia added, surprising the adults with her assertiveness. If it's our family's name on the program, we should help choose people who really understand what families need from their doctors. The wisdom of Sophia's suggestion was immediately apparent to everyone at the table. Who better to evaluate potential pediatric oncologists than a family who had experienced the medical system from multiple perspectives: patient, parent, advocate, and philanthropist. After Dr. Chun left and the children had scattered to their respective evening activities, Marcus and Rebecca sat together on the back porch, watching the lights of the city flicker to life in the gathering darkness. The 5 years since their reunion had passed with startling speed, filled with challenges and victories that none of them could have anticipated. Do you think we would have found each other without the medical crisis? Rebecca asked, a question that had become a periodic meditation on the mysterious forces that shaped human connection. I think, Marcus replied after long consideration, that some people are meant to be in each other's lives, and the universe finds ways to make that happen regardless of the specific circumstances, even if it means children getting sick, even if it means car accidents and medical emergencies. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the impossible mathematics of gratitude and loss. I would give anything for Sophia never to have had cancer, for your boys never to have been in that accident. But since those things happened, I'm grateful they led us to each other and to this life we've built together. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, her head finding the familiar spot that had become her preferred resting place during quiet conversations. The foundation received another letter today from a family in Seattle. Their daughter completed CAR-T therapy successfully, and the parents want to establish an endowment fund for other families facing similar circumstances. The ripple effects just keep expanding, Marcus observed, thinking about the infinite ways that individual acts of kindness could propagate through time and space. I think that's the point, Rebecca replied. I think we're supposed to save each other over and over again in whatever ways we can. The night settled around them, filled with the familiar sounds of their neighborhood and the distant hum of the city beyond. Somewhere in that urban landscape, other families were facing medical crises, making impossible decisions, and discovering reservoirs of strength they didn't know they possessed. Some of those families would receive foundation support. Others would benefit from medical advances that Sophia's case had helped prove. And still others would find hope in learning that survival and recovery were possible. What do you think our children will accomplish? Rebecca asked, her voice soft with the speculation that occupied many of their quiet moments. I think, Marcus said, watching the lights twinkle across the city, that they'll save the world in ways we can't even imagine. One person at a time, one family at a time, one breakthrough at a time. The future stretched ahead of them, unknowable, but bright with possibility. Their story had become part of a larger narrative about resilience, community, and the ways that individual acts of courage and compassion could create expanding circles of hope that reached far beyond the original participants. Inside the house, they could hear the children's voices as they shared details about their respective days, their laughter creating a soundtrack of normalcy that had once seemed impossible. The boy who drew horses had become an artist whose work inspired healing. The boy who built things had discovered ways to engineer hope. The girl who had fought cancer was learning to help other children find courage in their own battles. Their family had been forged by crisis and strengthened by choice, bound together by love that transcended biology and circumstance. They had learned that some debts could never be fully repaid, but they could be honored through the creation of new opportunities for rescue and renewal. The circle that had begun 15 years ago on a rain-soaked street corner would never truly close, Marcus realized. It would continue expanding, reaching outward to embrace other families, other children, other possibilities for transformation. And hope. They had become part of something larger than themselves, participants in an endless chain of saving and being saved that stretched far beyond their understanding, but demanded their continued participation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new chances to demonstrate that survival was possible, and that families could emerge from crisis not just intact, but strengthened by their experiences. Tonight, they sat together, under the vast sky, grateful for the mysterious forces that had brought them together and committed to honoring that gift through lives dedicated to service and love. The story that had begun with a stranger stopping to help on a dangerous night had become a testament to the power of human connection and the endless possibilities for redemption and renewal that existed when people chose to show up for each other consistently and without reservation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.